December 17, 1944, at 0800 hours, Bullingen, Belgium. Oberfurer Yoim Piper was standing in the town square, overseeing his men as they refueled his tanks. The scene involved American fuel being poured into German tanks under armed guard by American prisoners of war who were working the pumps. As commander of Kampfgruppe Piper, which served as the spearhead unit for the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, he had a force comprising 4 800 soldiers at 117 tanks, and assault guns at his disposal. His objective was straightforward: break through American lines, advance rapidly to the west, cross the Meuse River, capture the bridges there, and divide the Allied armies in half. The offensive had commenced just 30 hours prior, and Hitler had named it Operation Wacht and the Watch on the Rhine. It marked the largest German assault in the Western Front since 1940. 3 armies totaling 250,000 men and equipped 400 tanks and assault guns were involved. The ultimate goal was to reach Antwerp, cut off British and Canadian forces, force the Americans back towards Bastogne and Trier, and negotiate a different course for the war. However, there was an issue with fuel supplies. Despite the German High Command allocating 5 million gallons of gasoline for the entire operation, basic calculations indicated that twice this amount would be necessary for the panzers to reach Antwerp. The planners were well aware of this situation, and their solution was straightforward: seize American fuel depots, take what they needed, and keep advancing. Prior to the assault, Piper's divisional intelligence officer had handed him a map highlighting various strategic locations such as American supply installations, fuel dumps, ammunition depots, and resupply points. The information provided was precise. American supplies were scattered throughout the area. The critical issue lay in whether the Germans could capture these facilities before the Americans managed to destroy them. Bullingen served as the initial test case. Piper's camp commander had secured the town at 07:30 that morning, and the rapid retreat of the American forces left everything behind intact. One fuel depot contained 50,000 gallons, which was sufficient to refuel Piper's entire spearhead and enable further westward movement. To conserve his own troops' energy after nearly 36 hours of continuous combat, Piper ordered captured American prisoners to handle the fuel transfer tasks into German tanks. This approach proved highly efficient. It was equally degrading for the prisoners, a tactic Piper viewed as psychologically advantageous. Fuel was steadily being distributed. Piper observed soldiers passing jerry cans along the line. Each can contained 5 gallons, with 10 required per tank. Calculating this across 100 tanks meant needing 5,000 gallons of fuel in total. Refueling such a vast quantity would take considerable time, hours that Piper could ill afford. Every moment wasted was an opportunity for American forces to fortify their defenses. Without fuel, the panzers were rendered ineffective. These steel behemoths on tracks held no value without gasoline. On the Eastern Front, Piper had witnessed firsthand how critical fuel supplies were. Even the most advanced tank became useless if it lacked fuel. In 1943, more German vehicles fell victim to fuel shortages than to Soviet combat actions. Entire divisions found themselves immobilized, tanks left abandoned, and positions overrun due to the inability of panzers to move when needed. The same predicament now faced Piper's forces in Belgium. Logistics had broken down completely. Fuel intended for their offensive was trapped behind enemy lines due to traffic congestion, damaged roads, and relentless American fighter attacks during daylight hours. Supply trucks were nowhere to be seen, leaving Piper with 2 options: capture fuel from the Americans or halt his advance. Amidst this chaos, one of Piper's officers named Noisky approached him for a discussion. Noisky served as Piper's personal staff officer, having been with him since their time in France. Noisky was a dependable and competent individual. In his latest report, he informed Piper that the fuel reserves were far more depleted than anticipated. The 50,000 gallons stored at Bullingen would barely suffice for the immediate future. Beyond that point, additional supplies would be crucial. This information wasn't new to Piper, who was already aware of a potential fuel depot in Stavalot which appeared larger than Bullingen. Intelligence suggested that American forces might either defend or destroy this location, emphasizing the urgency for Piper's swift arrival there. The refueling operations proceeded without pause. Piper toured the recently seized supply depot, where American provisions were meticulously arranged and clearly marked. Ammunition crates, medical supplies, rations, winter clothing. Every item was plentiful and organized with precision. Curious about one of the ration boxes, Piper picked it up. A small cardboard container coated in brown waterproof material. The label read K, Ration Meal Combat Individual Breakfast Unit. Upon opening it, he found a can containing chopped ham and eggs, hard biscuits, a chocolate bar, 4 cigarettes, instant coffee, sugar tablets, chewing gum, a wooden spoon, matches, toilet paper, and a can opener. Everything necessary for a single meal. All packed neatly into a box no larger than a book and weighing less than 1 pound, with no need for cooking or field kitchens. Just open the package and eat. With over a decade of commanding combat units since 1940, Piper had first-hand knowledge of what German soldiers received in their rations. The standard German field ration, when it actually arrived, necessitated cooking due to its bulk packaging that required field kitchens for preparation. The bread was extremely tough, while the meat consisted largely of fat. Since 1943, the quality had been deteriorating. By late 1944, front-line units were fortunate if they received anything at all. Piper's camp had departed Germany with a 3-day supply of rations, which were now completely depleted. His men were surviving on whatever food they could scavenge, including captured American supplies and items taken from Belgian civilians. Some units even resorted to slaughtering horses for sustenance. As he held the ration box in his hand, he noticed that it was manufactured in October 1944, making it 2 months old. The Americans were producing these rations so recently that supplies made just weeks earlier had already reached the front lines. Noki approached with a paper and handed Piper the ration box. When he opened the can of ham and eggs and ate it cold, his expression revealed surprise at how good it tasted compared to anything German soldiers had eaten in months. Noki examined the other items inside the box: genuine coffee, chocolate, American cigarettes, and even small luxuries such as matches, toilet paper, and chewing gum. Piper remained silent, lost in thought while doing mental calculations. If each American soldier received 3 boxes per day, that equated to 9 meals daily. With 10 million soldiers worldwide, this meant a staggering 30 million meal boxes every single day, or 900 million monthly. The industrial might required to sustain such production was immense. Germany had never produced anything on this scale before. Since 1939, the entire German war industry had been mobilized for total warfare, manufacturing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition, yet they couldn't produce enough food to adequately feed their troops. Meanwhile, the Americans were packaging individual meals in waterproof containers with extras like gum. Noki then noticed something else. There were hundreds, possibly thousands of these boxes at the depot. This was just one supply point in a small town. How many depots did the Americans have? What quantities of food and supplies could they manage? Piper had fought against Soviet forces in the east, witnessing their logistics firsthand. The Soviets had mass production capabilities that were crude but effective, with endless columns of trucks and factories beyond German reach. The Soviets managed to replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them, yet even their logistics seemed primitive compared to what the Americans were capable of. The Soviet approach involved transporting supplies in large quantities, while the Americans focused on individually packaging each item. The Soviets relied solely on volume, whereas the Americans combined both quantity and quality. Every component Piper inspected displayed meticulous engineering, waterproof casing, compactness, and extended shelf life. This was not a hasty workaround, but rather the result of industrial-level planning. An SS Sturmbannführer named Vera Poetsky arrived on the scene. She commanded what remained of the 1st SS Panzer Battalion. Her unit had suffered tank losses during their advance and required urgent resupply. Their fuel and ammunition were dwindling, necessitating immediate replenishment. Piper informed her that fuel distribution was underway at that moment. The ammunition would come from seized American stockpiles, including crates of 75 mm shells that fit German artillery. Poetsky asked about food supplies for her men, who had not eaten since the previous day. Pointing to the rations, Piper indicated that they could use American K-rations. Take whatever you require. It is essential that the men eat now and carry additional supplies because we cannot predict when our next chance to replenish will occur. Poetsky gathered several boxes and handed them out to his tank crew members. The soldiers eagerly opened their rations and began eating, treating these American emergency field meals as if they were a rare feast due to their superior quality compared to what they usually receive. By zone 9330, the process was complete. Piper then gave the order for everyone to get moving. The camp group quickly reformed into march formation with tanks leading the way, followed by half-tracks and support vehicles bringing up the rear. This long procession stretched over several kilometers. Piper's command vehicle positioned itself near the front of the column as it advanced northwest towards Stavalot, a distance of 14 kilometers that could be covered in around 20 minutes on decent roads, but were currently far from ideal due to mud and refugees, along with wrecked vehicles scattered throughout. Despite retreating, American forces were still putting up resistance, necessitating thorough searches of every village and inspection for explosives at breach they encountered. According to Piper's intelligence map, there was a significant fuel depot located near Stavalot, even larger than the one in Bulge. However, its precise whereabouts within the town remained unclear. The document presumed its point would be self-evident. Supply depots were expansive facilities housing numerous vehicles and storage tanks. Such extensive equipment could not remain concealed. The camp group arrived in Stavalot at noon. Positioned on either side of the Omlev River, the town was bisected by a stone bridge. American troops were defending this vital structure. Leading units from Piper's forces initiated combat with them. Despite having anti-tank weaponry and displaying fierce resistance, the Americans struggled. The conflict for control over Stavalot lasted 3 hours. Eventually, Piper's forces compelled the Americans to retreat across the river. German engineers then inspected the bridge, finding it undamaged and intact. It appeared that the Americans had attempted to destroy it with explosives but failed, as the charges did not detonate. This was fortunate since a destroyed bridge would have halted their advance entirely. Subsequently, Piper's units crossed the bridge into the western section of Stavalot in search of the fuel depot. Intelligence indicated its presence nearby, holding significant quantities necessary for sustaining operations over several days. However, upon thorough investigation, they discovered nothing at the site. Reconnaissance teams were dispatched in all directions. They were instructed to inspect the outskirts and patrol the roads. Each building needed to be thoroughly searched. The fuel depot had to be located somewhere, given that the Americans wouldn't simply abandon 3 million gallons of gasoline. It was likely they would either defend it or destroy it if necessary. However, Piper's men found no signs of this. By 1500 hours, one of his reconnaissance officers reported discovering American supply caches north of town. These contained only small quantities, perhaps a few thousand gallons in total scattered along the roads. This wasn't the major depot intelligence had anticipated. Piper concluded that either the fuel depot did not exist or the Americans had already evacuated it. Regardless, he couldn't afford to wait any longer. His camp group still possessed enough fuel to proceed with their advance, albeit barely sufficient. Their mission was to reach the Meuse River, and every hour lost was an hour wasted. They needed to continue moving forward. At 1600 hours, the camp group left Stavalot and proceeded westward. Meanwhile, American engineers reoccupied their previous positions in the hills to observe. Once the Germans had passed through, they secured the bridge approaches, ensuring that Stavalot would not be entirely captured. The Americans were prepared to defend the southern bank of the river. Unbeknownst to Piper, a fuel depot was situated nearby. It contained 200,000 gallons of gasoline stored in 5-gallon jerry cans along a stretch of road measuring 5 meters wide. Depot numbers 2 and 3 were located just north of the road, approximately 800 feet away from where Piper had driven. Piper drove past this massive fuel supply without noticing it because there was no attempt to hide or camouflage the depot. The jerry cans were simply stacked along the roadside in plain view. Despite being visible, Piper expected a fuel depot to resemble German depots with storage tanks and buildings rather than portable containers. After the war, Major Ken Heckler, an American historian, conducted an interview with Piper. Heckler informed the paper about a depot containing 3 million gallons of fuel located just 300 yards from Piper's route. Piper merely shrugged and mentioned that he anticipated finding fuel stockpiled in town squares, similar to what happened in Bulge. Not spotting any fuel in Stavalot, he concluded the Americans had relocated it elsewhere. The discovery of this depot would have altered everything. With 3 million gallons of fuel at his disposal, Piper could have repeatedly refueled not only his entire Kampfgruppe but also other German units. This abundance of fuel would have allowed him to keep the offensive moving forward and prevented a fuel crisis that later halted the German advance. However, Piper never located it, leaving him without the necessary resources to continue his progress. On December 21, 1944, in Stoumont, Belgium, Major Hal Macau was hunkered down in a cellar as German tanks encircled his position. As commander of the 2nd Battalion within the 119th Infantry Regiment and part of the 30th Infantry Division, he had been engaged in combat against Piper's Kampfgruppe for 3 days straight. His unit was now isolated from reinforcements, with the situation rapidly deteriorating as German armor became ubiquitous while American defensive positions crumbled under pressure. The radio operator Macau conveyed that German troops had advanced southward, completely encircling their position. By 14:30 hours, German infantry forces attacked the command center in Macau. A brief exchange of fire ensued, resulting in one American soldier's death. Following this skirmish, Macau and his staff were apprehended by the Germans. The captives were thoroughly searched for any weapons or confidential documents. Their belongings, including watches, cigarettes, and other valuable items, were confiscated. Macau was then transported to a dilapidated stone house situated near Stoumont's Piper command post. The structure bore visible signs of battle damage, with shattered windows and walls riddled with bullet holes. Inside the house, German officers were engaged in map study and defensive planning activities, as by December 21st, Piper's offensive operations had ceased entirely. Piper's camp was now cut off from all supplies and reinforcements. Lacking fuel, ammunition, and other essential resources, it became clear that there was no viable escape route or option to advance further. As Macau arrived at the stone house, he encountered Colonel Piper standing by a map table. Standing tall with an aristocratic profile, the 30-year-old Piper spoke fluent English. Recognizing each other as battalion commanders of opposing sides, both men introduced themselves and exchanged brief information about their respective units and ranks. Macau provided the necessary details as outlined by the Geneva Convention: his name, rank, serial number, and 2 additional numbers. The interrogator, referred to as Piper, did not push for further information. Instead, he appeared more inclined to engage in conversation than interrogation. That evening, from 2300 hours until 0500 hours the next morning, Piper and Macau discussed various topics related to the war for 7 continuous hours. They were seated in a room filled with maps. During their discussion, Piper was the primary speaker while Macau listened intently. Piper defended Nazism, explaining Germany's motivations for fighting and justifying its actions. Later, Macau expressed that he had seldom encountered someone as impressive as Piper within such a brief period. Piper displayed remarkable intelligence, education, articulation, and unwavering confidence in Germany's ultimate victory, even under dire circumstances of being surrounded, lacking fuel, and facing the disintegration of his camp group. For 3 days, Macau observed the camp where Piper was stationed, noting every detail about German supply conditions, morale equipment, food, and medical care. He recorded mental notes because he knew this information would be invaluable. However, what Macau witnessed contradicted Piper's assertions that Germany was on the path to victory. Despite Piper's claims, evidence suggested otherwise. German soldiers fatigued after 5 days of continuous combat with minimal rest. Many were clad in remnants of American uniforms, including knit caps, gloves, sweaters, overshoes, and even overcoats. They wore enemy uniforms due to their supply system's inability to deliver sufficient winter attire. Generally, the men's health was satisfactory. There were no signs of starvation or severe malnutrition, though their diet was inadequate. German rations were insufficient, and most soldiers relied on captured American provisions such as K-rations, C rations, and 10-in-1 rations. Macau observed German troops opening American ration boxes with great interest. They examined the contents like children exploring gifts, chocolate bars, real coffee, cigarettes. Items that American soldiers often took for granted but were rare luxuries to the Germans who hadn't seen such treats in months. One soldier showed Macau a can of ham from an American K-ration and remarked that it was superior to anything provided by the Wacht system. The canned meat issued by the German army was mostly fat and gristle, required cooking, and tasted unpleasant. In contrast, this American ham was properly preserved and could be eaten cold. If Germany could produce such rations, the soldier said, the war would have a different outcome. Macau remained silent as he was a prisoner, knowing that any argument would be futile but understanding the implications behind the soldier's words. The inability of Germany to manufacture comparable rations indicated its deficiency in industrial capabilities. Without adequate food production, Germany struggled to manufacture other essential goods necessary for modern warfare. Medical supplies in the German army were severely limited at Stumont's aid station. There was no morphine or sulfur drugs available. Bandages were repeatedly used due to scarcity. Soldiers screamed during medical procedures because there was nothing to alleviate their pain. At Macau, amputations were carried out with minimal anesthesia. Sometimes, just leather restraints held by comrades as patients endured the agony of bone breaking while fully conscious. Such practices would be considered archaic in American medical standards. In contrast, American aid stations had ample supplies including morphine, sulfur drugs, clean bandages, and sterilized instruments, ensuring that wounded soldiers received effective pain management, antibiotics to prevent infections, and professional care. While German medics did their best with limited resources, the quality of care was far inferior compared to American practices. On December 22nd, the Luftwaffe attempted an aerial resupply operation for Camp Grouper Piper by dropping supply canisters from 6 low-flying planes. However, most canisters missed their intended drop zone within German lines and landed outside the perimeter, where they were recovered by American forces. The Germans watched helplessly as these supplies fell into enemy hands 200 yards away in American positions. This resupply mission was a complete failure, leaving Piper's forces isolated and surrounded by American units. With no fuel, ammunition, or medical supplies and limited food, the predicament was dire. Additionally, there were 170 American prisoners and hundreds of German casualties with no means to evacuate the wounded. This unsustainable situation led Piper to convene a meeting with his senior officers on December 23rd, where Macau also attended. As German commanders deliberated over their options, it became evident that none of them were viable. Advancement was impossible due to fuel shortages. Likewise, indefinite defense was not an option because they lacked ammunition. Retreat with vehicles was out of the question owing to a lack of fuel as well. The remaining choice was to attempt a breakout on foot, abandoning all their tanks, half-tracks, vehicles, wounded soldiers who could not walk, and American prisoners. The decision was made to proceed on foot. The vehicles were to be destroyed, and the wounded left behind with American medical supplies. They were instructed to release any American prisoners they held and then march eastward through the forest in an attempt to reach German lines. This move offered their soldiers the best chance of survival. The breakout commenced at 2:00 a.m. on December 24th, as 800 German troops moved quietly under cover of darkness, snow, and dense woodland. Without vehicles or heavy weaponry, they carried only small arms and personal belongings. Macau managed to escape during the chaos and made it back to American lines by Christmas Day. He submitted a comprehensive after-action report detailing everything he had witnessed: supply conditions, equipment status, morale levels, food shortages, and medical care. His documentation was precise and thorough. Later in June 1946, Macau testified at the Maumee trial as a defense witness. He attested that his captors had adhered to the Geneva Conventions while holding him. During his testimony, he described the dire conditions within German lines, highlighting supply failures, desperation among troops, and the professionalism of soldiers struggling with insufficient resources. His statement was unequivocal. The German defeat at Stu was not due to American tactical superiority. Instead, it stemmed from their lack of supplies. They had exhausted all resources: fuel, ammunition, food, medical provisions, and more. The Wehrmacht's operational capacity dwindled over 80 days, rendering them unable to sustain combat operations without adequate logistics support. At Lel, the Germans abandoned 7 Tiger II tanks along with 50 medium tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 135 other vehicles because their fuel supplies were depleted. Despite being in good condition and loaded with ammunition, these advanced armored vehicles became immobile metal sculptures. Belgian civilians later retrieved many of these vehicles, some of which found homes in museums. Visitors often inquire about the reason behind such abandonments, to which the consistent response is that there was simply no fuel left. The tanks could not function without it, and the crews had no choice but to leave them behind. This occurred in January 1945, around the time when many Germans were being transferred to prisoner of war camps in France. General Obert Hasso von Manteuffel was sitting in an interrogation room facing American intelligence officers. He had commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive and was a seasoned professional soldier with extensive experience on the Eastern Front. From the outset, he had been against Hitler's plan for the operation. The American interrogators posed numerous detailed questions. What were Germany's strategic aims? How many resources did they allocate to the effort? And why it ultimately failed? Manteuffel provided candid responses. For him, the war was over, and there was no point in concealing anything. His testimony would contribute to military studies and become part of the historical record. He informed the officers that he and Field Marshal Model had vehemently opposed Hitler's strategy from the beginning, advocating instead for a more modest offensive with achievable goals. Hitler's plan called for capturing Antwerp and crossing the Meuse River in order to divide Allied forces and force negotiations. However, Manteuffel explained that such an ambitious goal was strategically unfeasible given the available resources. The fuel allocation was particularly problematic. Only 5 million gallons were distributed among 3 armies comprising 400 tanks and thousands of vehicles, which basic arithmetic demonstrated would be insufficient for success. Furthermore, the plan rested on the assumption of seizing Allied fuel depots, a risky gamble that might not have paid off. Relying on enemy supply depots for military operations is unwise. What if the Americans obliterate these facilities? What if they are not located? Or what if they manage to defend them successfully? All 3 situations occurred. Some depots were wiped out, others remained undiscovered, and still others were well protected. The fuel shortage began right away and persisted throughout. Manteuffel reported that his tank divisions were pleading for fuel as early as December 19th, just 2 days into the offensive. Supply trucks failed to reach the front lines, leaving captured fuel insufficient. As a result, the entire operation ground to a halt with immobilized tanks awaiting gasoline that never arrived. When questioned by American interrogators about German logistics in general, Manteuffel was honest. he admitted that German logistics had completely collapsed, not just during the Ardennes offensive but across the board since 1943, possibly even earlier. The vast distances on the Eastern Front were a significant factor in this breakdown of supply lines. The quality of the roads was subpar, and the Soviet resistance proved exceptionally resilient. German trucks suffered frequent mechanical issues that outpaced repair capabilities. The railways endured relentless assaults, leading to a heavy reliance on equine transport for the Wehrmacht. Hundreds of thousands of horses were employed to pull supply wagons in conditions reminiscent of the Franco-Prussian War era. By late 1944, some German divisions had more horses than those deployed during WWII. This paradoxical situation saw mechanized warfare being supported by horse-drawn logistics. The disparity between tank mobility and horse-drawn vehicle speed was stark. Tanks could cover up to 20 kilometers in an hour, whereas supply wagons required a full day to traverse the same distance. Consequently, combat units often outstripped their logistical support, becoming immobilized as they awaited supplies that never arrived or were delayed excessively. This heavy reliance on horses introduced further challenges. Each horse needed about 20 pounds of fodder daily to maintain operational readiness, meaning that a division with 5,000 horses required 50 tons of feed per day just for sustenance. Transporting this massive volume of feed over roads already burdened by military traffic exacerbated the logistical strain. Additionally, horses succumbed to exhaustion, air raids, or insufficient nourishment, leaving dead animals, blocking critical supply routes and necessitating their removal. American logistics relied solely on trucks, which did not need daily feeding and could sit idle without consuming resources when not in use. These vehicles outperformed horse-drawn wagons by moving faster, carrying heavier loads, and requiring fewer maintenance personnel. The American truck fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands and was composed of standardized designs that utilized interchangeable parts and were supported by a comprehensive spare parts supply system. Allied strategic bombing campaigns exacerbated these logistical challenges. Targets included every rail junction, bridge, and road, which were frequently strafed by fighter bombers. As a result, German logistics units could only operate at night. Daytime movement was perilous due to the certainty of aerial attacks. American P-47s and P-51 fighters relentlessly targeted any moving vehicles, destroying supply columns, fuel trucks, and food convoys. German production facilities struggled to compensate for these losses. Factories were repeatedly bombed, and raw materials became scarce, further complicating their efforts to maintain operational readiness. Combat units were forced to recruit skilled laborers, while the industrial infrastructure was deteriorating. The products manufactured often failed to reach frontline troops due to damaged transportation systems. In contrast, Manteuffel highlighted American logistics capabilities. Americans enjoyed protected supply routes and factories located 3,000 miles away from combat zones, ensuring they could produce war materials at rates Germany couldn't match. Ships continuously crossed the Atlantic Ocean delivering essential supplies. For instance, the port of Antwerp processed more cargo than all German ports combined each month. American storage facilities were widespread, providing an abundance of fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts that were meticulously organized and readily available. Standardized containers enabled soldiers to manage supplies without specialized training. Given the high production levels, waste was tolerable if it expedited distribution. Conversely, Germany had no surplus capacity. Every supply depot and fuel truck was crucial, and each ration was strictly accounted for. The Wehrmacht operated perpetually on the brink of collapse, where even a single disruption could trigger a crisis, while two could lead to disaster. The American officers inquired about the moment when Manteuffel realized Germany was destined to lose World War II. Manteuffel replied that he understood this in 1943 following the Battle of Kursk, although Germany could still win individual battles. Winning a war required far more than merely securing victories on the battlefield. It demanded substantial resources such as industrial capacity, oil supplies, agricultural output, manpower, and time, none of which Germany possessed in sufficient quantities. In contrast, the United States had virtually limitless industrial production capabilities, secure oil reserves from Texas and the Middle East, ample food to feed its military and civilian population, a total populace of 130 million people, and the ability to fully mobilize this force. Germany's loss in terms of resources preceded its defeat on the battlefield. Once the United States entered the war, German victory became impossible, though not instantaneous or effortless. The arithmetic was straightforward. America could manufacture more tanks, aircraft, ammunition, food, and every essential resource than Germany could destroy. Over time, this overwhelming material advantage would wear down German resistance. Operation Nordwind in the Ardennes, a last-ditch attempt, involved utilizing the remaining strategic reserves to achieve a decisive victory and compel negotiations from the Allies. However, Hitler believed that sheer willpower and bravery alone could overcome a shortage of resources. Manteuffel disagreed. While determination and courage are crucial, logistics ultimately hold greater significance. Without supplies, an army cannot sustain combat, regardless of the bravery of its soldiers. The offensive was a failure. German casualties were devastating, 600 tanks either destroyed or left behind, and 34,000 killed alongside 60,000 wounded or missing. The Wehrmacht's final mobile reserves had been depleted. Following the Ardennes campaign, Germany could only retreat. There would be no further offensives. All that remained were delaying tactics until the ultimate conclusion. Manteuffel was tasked with producing comprehensive reports on the Ardennes offensive. He compiled 148 pages detailing operations of the 5th Panzer Army and another 161 pages analyzing planning, execution, and lessons learned. These documents are referred to as Foreign Military Studies manuscripts B151 and B51-1A. His analysis was professional, balanced, acknowledging American achievements while honestly evaluating German shortcomings. Manteuffel's tone remained clinical and detached throughout his work. He pointed out the flaws in German strategy without offering excuses or engaging in propaganda. Instead, he presented a factual account of what transpired, why it occurred, where mistakes were made, and their consequences. In contrast, other German generals were less candid after the war, often attributing failures to Hitler's interference or poor weather conditions. They attributed their misfortunes to bad luck and avoided addressing the core issue. Germany lacked the industrial and logistical infrastructure needed to sustain modern warfare against better resourced adversaries. Manteuffel did not shy away from stating the truth. He presented the facts plainly. Germany's defeat stemmed from being outproduced, undersupplied, and unsustained compared to its enemies. Despite retaining tactical proficiency in December 1944, the German army's strategic resource limitations guaranteed eventual failure. The interrogation was concluded, and Manteuffel returned to the prisoner compound, where he would spend a year under American custody before being released. After returning home to Germany, he led a long post-war life, lecturing at West Point in 1968 and providing expert analysis for documentaries until his death. His legacy was defined by his unwavering honesty, unlike many other German generals who revised history to justify their failures. Manteuffel始终坚持诚实分析，直到去世。他的遗产是他的坦诚，不像许多德国将军试图通过篡改历史来为失败开脱。阿登攻势的失败归咎于后勤问题，战争的失利则源于工业产能不足。无论战术技巧多么出色，都无法弥补物质上的劣势。1942月6日，在德国纽伦堡的一间牢房内 ，SS 军官约瑟夫·迪特里希正等待着自己的审判。Dietrich led the 6th SS Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive and had previously worked as a butcher before serving as Hitler's bodyguard. Despite his limited qualifications, he rose through the ranks, eventually being interviewed by an American psychiatrist named Leon Golden on February 28th. Golden was compiling information about the psychological conditions of Nazi war criminals. The conversation covered various topics such as the war, National Socialism, and the defeat of the offensive. During their discussion, Dietrich made a biting remark about his army, stating, "We call ourselves the 6th Panzer Army because we only have 6 tanks left." This was dark humor that reflected the dire situation accurately. The offensive had devastated his forces, leaving behind minimal equipment and personnel, with what remained barely constituting an effective military unit. Dietrich lacked strategic acumen. Hermann Göring later remarked about him, "He is a decent man but stupid. He has at most the ability to command a division." Hitler gave him control of an army. The outcome was predictable. The 6th Panzer Army was meant to spearhead the main thrust, yet it quickly encountered difficulties and became bogged down due to poor planning. Traffic congestion, fuel scarcity, and American resistance plagued Dietrich's forces. His army was allotted enough fuel to cover 90 to 100 miles, but Antwerp was 140 miles away. Even under ideal circumstances, this allocation fell short. The plan depended on seizing American gasoline reserves. Without capturing additional fuel supplies, the offensive would fail. The operation hinged entirely on obtaining enemy resources. This reliance exposed Germany's logistical shortcomings. Relying on夺取敌方资源来规划军事行动是不切实际的，这实际上是绝望而非策略。像蒙图菲尔这样的职业军官明白这一点，而像迪特里希这样的政治任命官员则不明白。戈登金德区询问了迪特里希关于攻势失败的原因。迪特里希归咎于各种因素，唯独没有提到燃料短缺的问题。他指责美国空军天气和地形，甚至责怪希特勒设定了不切实际的目标。这些批评都有一定道理，但他从未提及自己的军队因德国后勤无法支持进攻而耗尽了燃料。Following the conflict, both American and German military historians independently arrived at a similar conclusion. The Ardennes offensive ultimately faltered chiefly due to logistical issues. Fuel shortages impeded the advance, while ammunition scarcities and inadequate artillery support compromised combat readiness. Food shortages further diminished soldier performance, and medical supply deficiencies led to unnecessary casualties among the wounded. Despite this, German tactical execution frequently exhibited excellence. Individual units performed commendably, officers made sound decisions given their constraints, and soldiers demonstrated courage and skill. However, such efforts were insufficient in the face of logistical failures. An army without fuel cannot move forward, an army without ammunition cannot launch effective attacks, and an army lacking food cannot sustain prolonged operations. The American victory at the Battle of the Bulge was less attributable to superior tactics than to their robust logistics system. They swiftly transported reinforcements, adequately supplied defensive positions, and replenished losses from reserve units. Their logistical capabilities allowed them to maintain operational effectiveness throughout harsh winter conditions that hampered German forces. By December 1944, American logistics had matured significantly over 5 years of development, featuring extensive infrastructure, specialized logistics units, advanced vehicles, standardized procedures, strategically positioned supply depots across Europe, and efficient transportation networks capable of moving supplies from American factories to frontline foxholes within weeks. In April 1945, at an American interrogation center in Germany, Yoim Piper faced questioning by American interrogators regarding the operations of Kampfgruppe Piper. The conflict was nearing its conclusion, and Germany was disintegrating. Piper was poised to face war crimes charges for his involvement in the Malmö massacre. However, at that moment, the Americans were seeking tactical information from him. Piper provided a comprehensive account of the offensive, detailing planning phases, execution strategies, encountered challenges, and decision-making processes. He maintained a cooperative and professional demeanor throughout the interrogation, offering precise answers without any resistance or evasion. The American officers inquired about fuel supplies, when they had run out, where refueling took place, and which depots were seized. Piper explained the fuel crisis, noting that Bullingen had supplied 50,000 gallons of fuel, just enough to reach Stavalot. Upon arriving at Stavalot, however, he discovered no significant depot. Only small amounts scattered along roads proved insufficient. Continuing westward with minimal fuel, He eventually reached Stum and ran out entirely. An American officer questioned Piper about the depot near Stavalot, which reportedly held 3 million gallons of fuel just 800 feet from his route. The man claimed he was unaware of the depot's existence. The interrogator then presented a map and indicated the precise location where thousands of jerrycans were lined up along the road. According to Piper, he had been within 300 yards of this spot. After studying the map for some time, he shrugged and said in English, "I am sorry," when questioned about why he overlooked it. Piper explained that he anticipated fuel would be concentrated in town centers, similar to his experience at Bullingen, where supplies were often piled up in the square. Upon not finding any there, he assumed the Americans had already evacuated them. He did not consider looking for jerrycans along a roadside. The interrogator took notes as Piper continued to recount further operations, such as advancing towards Dumont, encircling enemy forces, and making the decision to break out on foot while abandoning all vehicles. They retreated through the forest back to German lines. Throughout his account, Piper showed no signs of regret or frustration regarding the missed depot. He simply viewed it as a tactical mistake explained in professional terms. Missing this opportunity was an inevitable part of war, but it altered the course of the battle significantly. With 3 million gallons at Camp Grouper, they could have refueled multiple times, continued their advance towards the Meuse River, and possibly achieved the breakthrough that was the offensive's goal. However, things might not have turned out as expected even with those resources. Despite having unlimited fuel reserves, Piper continued to encounter resistance from American forces. When the weather cleared, American air power dominated the skies. Meanwhile, American reinforcements were advancing at a pace faster than he could maintain. While logistics played a crucial role, it was not the sole determining factor. Fuel alone would not have secured victory, but it certainly would have altered the course of events. If fuel had been utilized effectively, German advancements would have extended further, resulting in greater casualties and territorial gains. The conflict likely would have persisted for an extended period. Overall, the strategic landscape would have shifted significantly. This all stemmed from a critical oversight. Piper bypassed 3 million gallons of gasoline because it failed to recognize what was right before its eyes. The fuel depot was clearly visible, easily accessible, and unguarded. Piper passed within just 300 yards without noticing it due to his narrow focus on identifying German infrastructure. He sought elaborate setups with buildings and guards rather than the straightforward American approach of simply stacking supplies where they were needed. This simple, efficient system exemplified American logistics. No wasted resources on unnecessary structures. The soldiers would figure out how to utilize whatever was provided effectively. German logistics were more intricate. Formal frameworks, designated supply stations, and official protocols governed the system. It functioned efficiently when everything ran smoothly, but it was vulnerable to disruption. Any parts malfunction could bring down the entire operation. American logistics, on the other hand, were robust and adaptable. With multiple storage facilities, losing one did not significantly impact operations. Standardized containers allowed soldiers to manage supplies without specialized training. Excessive production was tolerated if it sped up distribution. These represented core differences in strategy. The Germans prioritized control and efficiency, while Americans valued abundance and speed. Over the course of a prolonged conflict, the American approach proved more effective. The interrogation concluded, and the papers were returned to his confinement quarters. He would undergo trial, receive a conviction, serve time, eventually be released, and live out a lengthy post-war life until his mysterious death in France in 1976. His military career was meticulously documented, with tactical decisions analyzed and both failures and successes recorded. The fuel depot at Stavalot remained the most significant tactical error of his career. It wasn't a moral lapse or a war crime, it was simply a mistake. He had looked in the wrong place, made incorrect assumptions, and missed an opportunity that could have altered the course of the battle. That mistake highlighted a broader German failure. The Wehrmacht was searching for something that did not exist. They anticipated American logistics to mirror their own, with centralized depots and formal structures operating in predictable patterns. However, American logistics differed significantly. It was decentralized, adaptable, and abundant. K-rations exemplified this system. Though they were not the sole reason America won the war, they illustrated a key factor behind its victory. Over 1.5 million K-ration packages were produced in 1944 alone, each containing 3 individually packaged meals that provided 230 calories. These rations were manufactured in American factories, protected from enemy bombings, transported across the Atlantic Ocean, and delivered to troops engaged on multiple continents simultaneously. When German soldiers opened these boxes, they saw food, but they should have recognized them as indicators of America's industrial capacity, transportation networks, an economic system capable of producing millions of meal packages monthly and distributing them anywhere needed. The inclusion of small luxuries like chocolate, cigarettes, and chewing gum revealed the excess production capacity in American factories. This abundance allowed for non-essential items to be added because their manufacturing was so prolific. In contrast, German rations by 1944 were indicative of a failing system, inadequate nutrition, poor quality, inconsistent distribution, and reliance on field kitchens that often could not function properly. These issues reflected the scarcity of resources and strain on Germany's industrial capabilities. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, Wehrmacht soldiers were starving. Rations had collapsed, supply systems had disintegrated, and many German prisoners of war gained weight in American captivity because they received regular meals for the first time in months. One prisoner noted, "When I was captured, I weighed 128 pounds. After 2 years as an American prisoner of war, I weighed 185 pounds. My body had become so fat that you could no longer see my eyes." The quality and consistency of rations provided by American prison camps were superior to those available to German soldiers during combat operations. In January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge concluded with German troops retreating to their initial positions, allowing American forces to launch a counterattack. By March, Allied armies had crossed the Rhine River, and by April they were encircling Berlin. Germany surrendered unconditionally in May. The Ardennes offensive drained Germany's remaining strategic resources without altering the war's outcome. Although it briefly delayed Allied progress for several weeks and inflicted significant casualties, it failed to alter the course of the conflict. The German forces committed to this operation included some of their finest units. After the offensive, these units were decimated, dispersed, or rendered incapable of further sustained operations. Meanwhile, American strength continued to grow during this period as reinforcements arrived from the United States and more equipment and supplies became available. The logistics system remained highly efficient throughout. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, American forces in Europe had reached their peak level of strength and capability. The fundamental reason for Germany's defeat was its inability to sustain modern warfare against opponents with superior industrial and logistical capacities. While strategic blunders and tactical errors contributed to the loss, the core disparity lay in economic capabilities. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had robust industrial economies capable of producing war materials at a rate that outpaced Germany's ability to destroy them. The disparity played a decisive role. The United States enjoyed an overwhelming advantage in logistical support, surpassing even basic provisions. When it came to vehicle manufacturing, the numbers speak for themselves. During World War II, U.S. factories churned out 400,000 trucks, while Germany managed only 140,000. In terms of tank production, American plants delivered 63,000 tanks compared to Germany's 46,000. However, German tanks were more prone to maintenance issues and consumed greater quantities of fuel and spare parts. Conversely, American models were simpler, more dependable, and easier to maintain under field conditions. The disparity extended further into aircraft production. The United States produced a staggering 300,000 military aircraft during the war, whereas Germany managed only 120,000. This allowed American bombers to target German factories without fear of interception, while American fighters dominated European skies. Throughout 1944, German aircraft output dwindled despite their best efforts to ramp up production. Allied air raids devastated factory infrastructure at a rate faster than new facilities could be established. German soldiers witnessed these disparities firsthand during the Battle of the Bulge. They encountered abandoned American equipment left untouched by retreating forces, along with supply caches overflowing with food and ammunition, resources far exceeding what they had seen in months. Many even donned American uniforms due to shortages in winter clothing supplied by their own logistics system. Each encounter with captured U.S. supplies reinforced the stark contrast between the two nations' capabilities. The enemy possessed everything, while Germany had virtually nothing. This disparity significantly impacted the effectiveness of German troops in combat. Soldiers who realize their side is losing often fight differently compared to those who still believe victory remains attainable. In December 1944, German soldiers fought courageously despite being cold and hungry, yet this bravery could only go so far when they understood that even if they won a particular battle, the following day would bring more well-supplied American forces. American soldiers, on the other hand, had vastly different expectations. They were confident in the logistics system, knowing supplies would be delivered through airdrops should they find themselves surrounded. They also knew reinforcements would arrive to replace any casualties and that wounded soldiers would receive appropriate medical care. This assurance allowed them to maintain resistance even under extremely challenging circumstances. The Battle of the Bulge exemplified these dynamics repeatedly. American units encircled at Bastogne received vital supplies via airdrops, while forces pushed back at St. Vith were reinforced effectively. Casualties from American units were evacuated and treated with adequate medical resources. The Allied logistics network operated efficiently under pressure, whereas German logistics faltered and ultimately failed. By January 1945, the disparity in logistical capabilities had become undeniable. German troops abandoned their vehicles due to fuel shortages, while American forces had ample reserves of fuel stockpiled. German soldiers scavenged for food from local civilians, whereas American troops enjoyed hot meals prepared in field kitchens. Wounded Germans suffered without morphine in aid stations, while American casualties received pain relief and antibiotics. The final stages of the war underscored what the Battle of the Bulge had already shown: Germany could not maintain military operations against an opponent with robust logistics. As German supply chains completely collapsed, many of their units surrendered in mass, not due to a lack of courage or tactical prowess, but because they lacked essential supplies such as food, fuel, ammunition, and morale. When American forces entered Germany in 1945, they encountered a nation where strategic bombing had devastated infrastructure. Factories were reduced to rubble, rail yards were pockmarked with craters, and roads were impassable. The industrial capacity that had sustained German military operations was no longer there. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing war materials at full production levels. The economic conflict had been effectively decided long before the end of active combat. A K-ration exemplified this reality in a tangible form for German soldiers. It was a waterproof cardboard box containing 3 individually packaged meals with luxuries like chocolate and cigarettes. The manufacturer's date indicated recent production, highlighting the abundance evident in every captured American supply depot. This surplus went beyond mere sustenance. This demonstrated an industrial capability that Germany lacked and could never attain by 1944. Effective logistics were crucial. Tactics played a role, as did strategy and leadership. However, logistics provided the essential foundation for all other aspects. An army cannot carry out tactics without sufficient supplies, no matter how skilled its soldiers are. It cannot implement strategies regardless of the brilliance of its generals if it lacks adequate provisions, and it cannot sustain combat operations irrespective of the motivation of its troops if it is not well supplied. Germany's inability to sustain modern warfare against opponents with superior industrial and logistical capacity led to its defeat in World War II. The United States outproduced everyone else, delivered supplies more quickly, and maintained operational continuity longer. This economic disparity made the military outcome a foregone conclusion. While the K-ration did not directly win the war for America, it exemplified in December 1944 why German soldiers were losing: the overwhelming logistical superiority of their adversaries.